Welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 326. And if your bracket isn't busted, your head might feel like it is, because this is a whole new level of March Madness. Signalgate is here, opening day is here, but a new level of March Madness is truly here. And now is most definitely a time to stay vigilant. Yes, it can get worse, especially around national security. And we're going to get into all of it, including a conversation coming up with Seth Moulton, Congressman from Massachusetts, member of the Armed Services Committee, and Marine Corps veteran. And we're going to get into all of it. He left a SCIF, a secure information facility, to come on over and talk to me immediately afterward. And we're going to get into all of it. Now, this is not a secure environment. So we should all assume that the Russians, the North Koreans, and any other number of people are listening. So here's the first pitch, and we're going to get right into it with you-know-what in my top topics. So Friday night, I went on CNN into that alligator pit of a conversation that always happens on Abby Phillips' show. And we dug into the latest news. At that time, we were talking about whether or not Elon Musk was getting a classified briefing on China at the Pentagon. And at that time, there was a lot of clutter. There was a lot of rumors. There was a lot of conflicting information. And I tried to cut through it and tell everyone that we should be most concerned of all about one major component: how sloppy they are and how incompetent they are. I said that on Friday. And then we woke up this week to Signalgate.
Special government employee, he might have some sort of interest in it. I don't know.
The point is that it's not clear and it's constantly chaotic, and if at best
it's an anonymous source.
At best it's clumsy and sloppy. And they're not on the same page.
The reporting is clumsy and sloppy.
Let's use another example. They erased Jackie Robinson from the Department of Defense and the Tuskegee Airmen and any number of other people.
And they put them back.
Hold on, who are heroic people who've served our country. They said maybe it was a mistake. The Pentagon is not a place where we can make mistakes. It's not a place with a margin of error. If they're making mistakes in that area, what are they doing in Syria? What are they doing around security clearances? What are they doing in other areas? The issue we most need to be concerned about is sloppiness and incompetence. And when people are not on the same page in our national government around national security, our enemies are celebrating. By now you know that the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, and others were on a group chat that accidentally included Jeffrey Goldberg, the reporter from The Atlantic. And what we've learned now is the top national security professionals in our entire country were talking through military operations, a strike on the Houthi forces in Yemen, and they were doing it on an unsecure app, a commercially available app called Signal. That if you don't have it, you probably will. This has sort of been the best and worst commercial ever for Signal. But they were openly discussing secure, secret information about a pending military attack. They were talking about things like what kind of aircraft was being used, when it was going to leave, what kind of weapons packages it was going to have, the stuff that you should never put out on an unsecure app. Let me break this down for you a different way. And I also break it down with our guest coming up, Representative Seth Moulton. When I was in the Army, just like everybody who's been in the military for the last, 70 years or so, you were taught about operational security. You were taught that loose lips sink ships. You never want to put any kind of information out into the orbit that could be picked up by the enemy. Information like what kind of vehicle you're using, when you're leaving, what you're going to do. This is not your Little League group chat about opening day coming up this weekend. This is our top national security professionals openly talking about what they're going to do with military troops out in the open with an Atlantic reporter watching. Keep in mind, he likely wasn't the only one watching and listening. The Russians and any other number of people were probably listening as well. So here's what you need to know most. If a private in my infantry platoon did anything remotely like this, he would be in Leavenworth. He would be court-martialed. He would be brought before a court under the UCMJ, and he would be slammed. His military career would be over, and he'd probably go to jail. So why isn't the same true for our Secretary of Defense and all the way up to our Vice President? I'm going to say it straight up. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth needs to resign or be fired. I think everyone on that Signal chat needs to resign or be fired. That includes Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. That includes the Vice President J.D. Vance. They're all in there popping emojis. Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, actually posted this emoji icons of a fist, a flag, and a fireball after saying, "Great start, great job." The question everyone in America is asking, everyone in the world is asking, whether you're a military veteran or not, is what the fuck? So I tried to warn everyone that we should be worried about this leadership crew in the Pentagon and around the Pentagon, not just because they're extreme and political, but because they're sloppy and incompetent. And when you're talking about strikes on enemy forces involving the lives of American men and women who are in combat, there's no margin of error. There's no mulligans here. There's no okay fuck-ups. The margin of error is zero. So it's the highest possible level of seriousness and danger. And this is not just a little screw-up that they can spin away. This is a game-changing moment for our country's history, for our national defense, and for the entire world. And now is most definitely a time to stay vigilant. So, yet again, our troops are demoralized and frustrated and concerned. Yet again, our allies are scratching their heads asking, what the fuck? And yet again, our enemies are celebrating. And the days that followed, if you read their body language and you listen to the tone of their voice, you could tell that they knew they were in deep shit. Check this out.
President Trump said peace through strength will be brought back. Freedom of navigation will return. And that's exactly what we're doing. As I also stated yesterday, nobody's texting war plans. And that's all I have to say about it.
Now, that is not exactly a calm response from the leader of our military. And when the Secretary of Defense is rattled, our military is rattled, our national security is compromised, and we are all more vulnerable, from me to you to everyone in America. They can't spin this away, no matter how hard they try. And it was a week of lowlights. Check out this one.
Were you using your private phone or a public phone for the Signal discussions?
I won't speak to this because it's under review by the National Security Council. Once that review is complete, I'm sure we'll share the results with the committee.
What is under review? It's a very simple question. Are you your private phone or an officially issued phone? What could be under review?
National Security Council is reviewing all aspects of how this came to be, how the journalist was inadvertently added to the group chat, and what occurred within that chat across the board.
So if you watch that hearing and the related media hits that these folks did, or the videos that they posted on the internet, you are no more confident than you were before, unless maybe you're in the Trump administration and you're spitting, or you're Putin. It's sloppiness, incompetent, and lies on a level we've never seen before. Keep in mind, this is just a couple of days after Elon Musk went down to the Pentagon for some kind of a briefing, which was the week after he called Senator Mark Kelly a traitor, a guy who was a guest on this show a couple of weeks ago. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Also, go check out our conversation with his brother, astronaut Scott Kelly. Both have been in a tusk with Musk online and other places and out there defending our values, but good conversations that have led us up to this moment. But nobody in the Pentagon saw a problem with the fact that Elon Musk might potentially be getting a top secret briefing about our China war plans. Nobody saw a problem with the fact that he does business in China. He's a defense contractor for the United States, and he has conflicts of interest like we've never seen. Oh, and of course, he called a member of the Armed Services Committee a traitor. But they just tried to spin it away. But now with Signalgate, they can't spin this one away because it's all out there for the entire world to see. Now, we all get to see what the Russians and any other number of adversaries and enemies saw on Signal just a couple of weeks ago. And remember, this has been followed by an incredible amount of spin. And the harder they spin, the more important and egregious the issue is. And they are spinning hard on Signalgate. I'm recording this on Wednesday. You'll be seeing it or watching it on Thursday. But this was Hegseth late Tuesday night after getting off a plane in Hawaii.
Nobody's texting more plans. I know exactly what I'm doing, exactly what we're directing, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished. Successful missions that night and going forward.
He continues to sound and look rattled, which means our Pentagon is rattled, which means our national security is rattled, which means our enemies are celebrating. But it also means Trump is probably seeing all this on TV. and he can't be liking what he sees. So Hegseth may end up being first in, first out. He was the first of Trump's cabinet secretaries to be controversially confirmed, and he may be the first to be fired by tweet or by X. Stay tuned. Now, in a time like this, the number one seeds, the big stories, the dukes of our national security and politics can gobble up all the attention. There are other stories you need to watch too. There are number 10 Arkansas of the news or number 4 Texas Techs. Stories that aren't getting the flash and attention that number 1 Duke is, but are still threatening and are still important nonetheless. Those are the teams and the stories that are below the radar. Now, I've been outspoken over the last week about how ridiculous, despicable, and shameful the erasure of Jackie Robinson, the Tuskegee Airmen, and others at the Department of Defense is, not just for our national security, but for our national culture. But maybe below the radar. It extended beyond politics and had people far beyond the cable news networks outraged and upset. Check this out from Stephen A. Smith.
But the fact of the matter is, how is he not DEI? He was a soldier. And then he was a host on Fox News on the weekends. And he goes from that to being the head of a Defense Department that oversees more than 3.5 million people. How in the hell do you go from being a weekend host to being the head of over 3.5 million people for the Defense Department of the United States? He happens to be white. And we don't mention DEI when it comes to him. Why not? The biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action and DEI, some would argue, are white women. How come we don't mention that? Why is it always attached to black people? This is the kind of stuff that we're asking ourselves. And on a day like today, it gives us more credence to ask that question because of what happened with Jackie Robinson, who served in our military, drafted, served our country, and for hours upon hours in a day, his stuff was scrubbed, and we're supposed to believe that's accidental. We were born at night, Molly, some of us anyway, not last night.
Now, he directly called out Trump and Vance and Hegseth, who might have a few other things to deal with this week other than Stephen A. Smith. But his outrage is important and understandable. And there's a deeper part of this story that I want to pull out that's way below the radar. The Trump administration, Hegseth and others say they want to kill DEI. But what they're failing to recognize is that DEI includes a really important group, veterans. Veterans have been hired under DEI initiatives in the corporate and government sector for the last 2 decades. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of veterans. Almost every major government agency or company in America now has a veterans diversity hiring initiative. The entire federal government actually has a national veterans hiring preference. You can Google it or look for a link anywhere. But you won't ever hear Trump or Musk or Hegseth talk about how veterans are a part of DEI. Because thinking about the veterans preference reveals the ultimate flaw to their entire DEI initiative. Turns out veterans are like the political kryptonite to all of it. So if you kill DEI, you kill thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs and contracts for veterans. But that's something you won't hear Trump or Musk or Hegseth talking about anytime soon. It may be off their radar, but don't let it fall off yours. Because the purge is also continuing at the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is getting no attention now with all the other shit on fire right now. But we're going to give it some attention here. Because now we're finding out that all these VA layoffs are actually impacting the quality and availability of mental health care services for veterans. Some providers have had to cancel appointments and remote work, and the entire system is being upended. And veterans are undoubtedly waiting longer and getting less high quality care. And even if it's just a couple of veterans who are impacted, isn't that important enough to pump the brakes? Because veterans dying by suicide is not efficiency. But that headline should surprise nobody, except maybe VA Secretary Doug Collins, who our guest in the last episode, Lindsay Church, powerfully called Deceitful Doug, which I think is fitting. Because if you attack the entire VA system with the Doge blowtorch, there will be failures, there will be drop balls, there will be errors, it will happen, and vets will suffer. And I want to show you something. Chris is going to pull it up on screen here. This is a post from the VA Secretary, and I'm going to read it to you. He said, met this morning with leaders from some of the nation's leading veterans groups to hear their concerns and share our vision for reforming the department. Thanks to AMVETS, VVA, and others. Lots of good veterans groups that do good work. But there's a problem with this photo. Take a look at it. It's not exactly the best reflection of the diversity of the modern veterans community. Now, is it? But it's right on brand for this secretary and for this administration. So don't be surprised when the same guys do things like erase Jackie Robinson and the Tuskegee Airmen from the Department of Defense. None of this is normal, and none of it is acceptable. But with the chaos everywhere else in government, remember that the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and Musk and Doge continue to focus that flamethrower on the Veterans Affairs Department and on veterans nationwide. It may not be on the president or the media's radar, but keep it on yours. Now, all this stuff and the chaos of the VA especially reveals just how important it is to remember that the Republicans are definitely on the wrong track, but the Democrats will not save you. And coming up, I'm going to challenge our guest, Democrat from Massachusetts, Seth Moulton, on all this. But first, let me remind you why the Democrats will not save you, especially when it comes to the Department of Veterans Affairs. So, Senate Democrats are scheduled to hold shadow hearings on VA issues next month to highlight the dangers they see from the White House staffing cuts and the problems at the VA. Now, that's what you do when you're the minority party and you can't have formal hearings, you have shadow hearings. Nancy Pelosi used to do this at times, and it was actually good. She brought forward issues like burn pits and mental health problems and women's issues when the majority at that time wouldn't recognize it. But Nancy Pelosi also didn't do things like vote in favor of the people that she was coming out against a few weeks later, like, for example, Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. He is among the Senate Democrats who just last month voted to confirm Secretary Collins. And now they're having second thoughts. Now they want to have hearings. Well, why did you vote yes for him just a couple of weeks ago? This is just one example of why people are so pissed at Democrats nationwide. And it's one reason that in the recent CNN poll, the Democratic Party now has a favorability rating of just 27%. That's an all-time low, going all the way back a generation to when they first started doing these kinds of polls. People are pissed. Of course, they're pissed at Trump, and of course, they're pissed at this administration. But they're also pissed at the Democrats. And this guy right here nails exactly why.
Congressman, I cannot sufficiently emphasize this to you. The message that was sent by Democrats in Congress with the CR catastrophe was clear. It's not that you're in the minority. It's that you aren't even working together on a shared strategy. We are not interested in hearing that you are in the minority. We know that. We want you to show some of the backbone and strategic brilliance that Mitch McConnell would have in the minority.
Right.
We want you to show fight, and you are not fighting.
Now, I know I'm hard on the Democrats, and I think I'm hard on the Republicans too. And the Democrats don't show us signs that they're going to save us, but occasionally they do say good stuff. And I think you're going to hear good stuff coming up with Seth Moulton. But first, I want to highlight a young member of Congress who is actually making sense and said a lot of the right things lately. Listen to this from another Democrat from Massachusetts, Congressman Jake Auchincloss.
I think Democrats need to talk about big ideas in at least three veins. One, we have to talk about lowering costs for Americans, particularly by mass producing housing and by taking on the health insurance corporations that are the middlemen of a healthcare system that is inflating at 2x the cost, the rate of inflation in this country. Number two, we have to be the party that's serious about the rule of law and ending corruption in Washington, D.C., getting rid of closed primaries, getting rid of gerrymandering, both partisan and racial gerrymandering, and about taking back authorities that the presidency has usurped from Congress and the courts. And then finally, Jake, Democrats need to come forward with a set of ideas about how we're going to sanction the social media corporations that have been attention fracking our kids and that have been corroding our civil discourse. We should be taxing their digital advertising revenues, using those funds, which will be in the hundreds of billions of dollars every year, to support local journalism, to support one-on-one tutoring for kids, and to rein in the most powerful, the most wealthy corporations in the history of the world that have no sense of responsibility to their users.
Now, there's an important line in there that I want to pull out and highlight. He said, getting rid of closed primaries. That's something you've heard about in this show for years, something that everybody should support, not just independents, but Republicans and Democrats who care about democracy. This is something that would empower millions of independents like me and you who are currently blocked out of primaries happening nationwide. But bravo to you, Congressman. I hope we hear the same line from every Democrat or Republican in America. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think the Democrats are going to save you. But my guest in this episode is sure going to try. I first met Seth Moulton many years ago when he first started running for Congress. We were introduced by a mutual friend. No, not on a Signal app started by the National Security Advisor. No, it was over email like normal people do, and it didn't involve classified information. But I was introduced to him because he was a Marine Corps veteran who ran for Congress in 2014 and won, hoping to bring a new style of leadership, not just to Massachusetts, but to the National Democratic Party. In that year, 2014, he was the only Democratic challenger to win that year. Now, he sits on 3 committees, including the Critical Armed Services Committee, that's right at the crosshairs on all this Signalgate shit. He also serves as the ranking member on the Subcommittee for Strategic Forces, which is something we'll probably all hear a bit more about in the next couple of weeks. But he's been an advocate for veterans, not just in his policies, but in his personal example. But he's also gotten stuff done. He led the fight for a national 3-digit suicide prevention hotline, which is now 988, a good reminder. If you know a veteran who's in crisis or you're in crisis, you can always dial 988 on your phone. That's thanks in part to the work of Congressman Moulton. He's worked on a variety of other issues impacting veterans, his constituents, and all Americans. But he's joining us now at a critical time, because as his party and the country looks for leadership, he is in a position to rise to the moment. He sounds a little different from most Democrats. Sometimes he does sound like a Democrat, but the question is, does the future of the Democratic Party look like Joe Biden? Does it look like AOC? Or does it look like Seth Moulton? He's the kind of Democrat that will attract independent Americans. He's the kind of Democrat that independent Americans will want to recruit over to our team and encourage to leave the Democratic Party and declare his independence. Well, I'll ask him about that and definitely get into Hegseth, Signalgate, the firing of vets, and much more. I'm very thankful that he joined us coming right out of a SCIF and into this conversation. And you're going to hear it or watch it next. So welcome to my conversation with Marine Corps veteran and Congressman Seth Moulton. Welcome to just the start of Signalgate. Welcome to opening day of baseball. And welcome to March Madness on a whole nother level. Welcome to Independent Americans, episode 326. Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world. Holy shit. There is a lot happening in the world and it's hard to keep up with, but we are staying at the intersection of national security and politics with leaders who are living, breathing, working, fighting at that intersection. And the timing has worked out that we had previously scheduled a guest who I've been hoping to get on the show for a long time, a guy I've known for a long time, a guy who's been a patriotic leader in Congress and beyond. Joining us straight out of meetings related to everything happening, the great and powerful Congressman Seth Moulton is here on Independent Americans. Welcome, sir.
Paul, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So, we got a lot to get to. We're obviously going to talk about SCIFs and Hegseth and techs, but you're a leader. You're a dad. I start every conversation with the same question. Some folks are nervous. Some folks are scared. A lot of folks are outraged. Where are you right now, and how are you?
I'm outraged, but I'm not surprised. I've said from the very beginning the second Trump term is going to be worse than the first. And I've also said that every time you expect the Trump administration to do something bad, they do something worse. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out here. Now, I'm a very bipartisan guy. I call balls and strikes and have been very critical of the Biden administration, for example, one of probably the leading critic in Congress, along with Peter Meyer, of their Afghanistan withdrawal as just one example. So I've been never afraid to criticize my own party or a Democratic administration, but this Trump administration is really off the rails to the point where it puts the lives of Americans in serious danger.
And you are in Congress right now. You've been coming for meetings. I know you're going to get briefings throughout the day and are going to be having reaction. We all have now seen the latest installment of the Atlantic download with the actual chains of conversation. I know you're going to react, but let me start with the target. What are you going to do about it? What are you personally going to do about it? Because I think that's what folks want to know. Will you call for Hegseth's resignation? I personally think he has to resign. He can't effectively lead. I would argue they've all violated OPSEC in that chain, and they should all resign if they had any honor. But I know it's still coming together, but what are you going to do about it, Congressman, for folks who want action, who want accountability, and are concerned right now about the lives of our men and women in uniform?
I have called for Hegseth's resignation already, but more importantly, I'm trying to encourage my Republican colleagues to actually do something since they're in charge of Congress. And the reality is that as powerless as many Americans feel, some of us Democrats in Congress feel powerless as well because Republicans control the House and the Senate, and they're not fulfilling their constitutional duty to put a check on the executive, to actually control the budget. Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse. You learn that in elementary school, and yet my Republican colleagues seem to have forgotten it. Why? Because they're just scared of Donald Trump. They're just scared. They know the right thing to do. They understand the oath they took through the Constitution, and they are not upholding the Constitution because they are personally scared. So what I'm trying to do is convince these Republicans, let's do something together to actually get the reins on this administration before they get people killed.
So staying on Hegseth here, who knows if Trump decides to fire him by tweet before this drops on Thursday morning. We're recording this on Wednesday morning. But what are the levers that you all can actually flex here to do something? I mean, folks have been understandably frustrated by the Democrats' inability to stop them. You couldn't stop his nomination. If Trump doesn't stop him and you don't get any Republicans to cave here, like we saw last time on his nomination, what tactically do you have at your purview to be able to tackle this?
I mean, not a lot, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to keep speaking out, speaking up, putting in very stark terms what Hegseth has put at risk here. Because American lives are at risk when you disclose classified information. That's the whole point of why it's classified. In some cases, it's specific people on the ground, like intelligence operatives or the fighter jet pilots who are piloting these missions and need to do them in secrecy, not have them disclosed before they happen. In broader terms, though, it's the whole security of the general public, of the United States of America. Because when our adversaries know what we're doing, when they can hack into the conversations of our leaders, because they're holding them in places that are not secure, right? The reason that you're not allowed to do this on Signal on your unclassified phone, walking around the supermarket, sitting at home, or wherever else, is because it's not secure. So our adversaries can listen to what you're doing. You know, this isn't just some nice idea where you're supposed to be in a SCIF like I was this morning for a briefing just before this. And by the way, had to check my cell phones at the door, my AirPods, even my key fob had to be checked at the door, right? I don't get to have that in there and put classified information on my Signal chat. Yes, I've got Signal on my phone, but I don't use it for classified information. Right? So there's a reason why we do this, because American lives are at stake. And if it turns out that pretty soon our adversaries, if they're not already, are going to be listening in to these Signal chats among the people making these national security decisions for our country, then American lives writ large are going to be at risk.
Seth, you were a platoon leader in the Marine Corps. I was a platoon leader in the Army. We all know loose lips sink ships. We all know OPSEC. I posted some of the basic Army information this morning so folks can understand how OPSEC is taught, right, in basic training. If a guy in your platoon went on Signal and said, we're going outside the wire in a Humvee at 5 o'clock, what would you do as a platoon leader, and what would be the expectation in response to something like that? So folks understand, beyond the levels of classification, we're talking about like basic OPSEC protocol. Can you talk about how you would handle that and how most enlisted folks would be treated in a situation like this?
I would get him removed from my platoon. He would never go on a mission with us again. He would be removed from the Marine Corps, and I would ensure that he's criminally prosecuted for what he did.
And we saw this as recently as last year. A National Guardsman was sentenced to 15 years for stealing and posting stuff. Do you think it should go beyond Hegseth? I mean, again, if it was the whole platoon in the chat, right? Like we have here, we have Tulsi Gabbard, who you and I have known for decades. We've known Hegseth for decades. If all these folks are in the chat, should they all resign? Should there be, or should they be removed?
Every single national security professional on that chat knew that it was wrong. They knew that it was wrong. And my understanding is that this is not a one-off thing, that they have these signal chats going all the time, dealing with highly sensitive or classified information. And in fact, I've heard that they're still going on today. Every single one of them knows that's wrong. It's illegal when it comes to the handling of classified information, as we've discussed. It's also illegal when it comes to the retention of records, something that is required by law of the executive. You know, when we get these files in presidential libraries as allowed by law, it's because these records have been retained. That's part of following the law too. They broke that law as well. So there's two major categories of laws here. I'm no lawyer, Paul, but there's two big categories of laws that they have broken, and every single one of them broke it, and every single one of them knows.
Just by being on there, right? I mean, just by being on there.
Just by being on there. Right. If I ever was on a Signal chat where, you know, if you and I were on a Signal chat and someone put in classified information or started discussing stuff that shouldn't be on the chat, I would immediately say, hey, we're not discussing this. Delete immediately.
So how do we not call for the vice president to resign as well? I mean, he's a Marine. He knows this, right? I mean,
it's amazing how many of these are veterans, right?
Yeah.
And a couple of, you've talked about how everyone in the military, from the lowest private to the highest officer, and these were all pretty junior officers. I was a junior officer in the Marine Corps. We've all been educated on how to maintain and control classified information. People like Tulsi Gabbard, who served in Congress, got a re-education when you come here and serve on a national security committee. But we also learned some basic lessons like leadership by example and accountability. You take accountability for your actions. You lead by example. Why should anybody in the Department of Defense, why should the average Lance Corporal or private today think that he shouldn't be able to discuss operational plans on Signal? Because the Secretary of Defense is doing it and he's getting away with it. And not only that, but he's getting away with it by lying about what he did rather than taking accountability. I think we'd be having a different discussion here if Pete Hegseth had the honor, the decency, and the basic honesty to just say, yeah, I screwed up. I should not have done it. I will never do it again. Here are the things that we are changing to make sure it never happens again, and it is my fault. Now, in my opinion, he should still resign, but we would still be a very different conversation. Instead, what is he doing? He's not taking accountability. He's lying to the American public about what happened.
So I'm going to take that as a pass on the VP. You're not calling for his resignation.
Sorry. I got distracted. Of course he should resign as well.
VP too, right? We're talking about the VP.
All these things apply.
Everybody on there should resign.
All these things apply. Yes, he should resign as well. Now, there's a political reality here, which is that you're probably not going to get that many heads to roll. So let's talk about the primary perpetrator. The guy who, national security professionals are honestly debating, do you think he's this incompetent or was he also drunk? That's what people are talking about with Pete Hegseth. Lots of reports of him continuing to drink on the job after promising, swearing under oath that his alcoholism would be a thing of the past. We all know alcoholism is a big problem he has had. He swore under oath in his confirmation hearing that he would stop drinking. A lot of reports coming in from the field, troops out there who've seen him out there drinking on the job. But that's where we are with the Secretary of Defense. So let's start there and get some accountability in this administration. By the way, good little quote, Paul. Accountability is back.
Yeah.
End quote.
I saw your press conference yesterday. And I think that you were quoting Hegseth. I think, and I want to stay on that because this is an important moment for our country. And, this is independent Americans. You've got a lot of people in this country who are sick of the Republicans and sick of the Democrats because they feel like they're doing crazy shit and you can't stop them. So yesterday you were there with Pat Ryan, who's been on this show, who I think is a strong and thoughtful leader. But the Democratic Party's got the lowest favorable rating in modern history, 27%. This is a question of whether or not the Democrats can actually do anything. So you're stepping forward. You and Pat and others are going to be in the spotlight on this issue. The real question is, can you do anything about it? Do you really think you can do anything about it? Or are we going to watch you guys get rolled again like we've seen so many times before?
Well, again, the elections have consequences, and Republicans are in charge of Congress right now. So our ability to do anything about it does, in fact, depend on Republicans. We're going to keep speaking out. I'm going to keep having these conversations. I'm not going to be afraid to say what people are saying behind the scenes, like this guy might have just been drunk, as if that's an excuse.
So how do you tackle that?
The point is,
right? Is like, we know you guys are gonna say a lot, right? And we know what they're gonna do. And are we gonna just keep coming to the same point where they say, "Fuck you guys, we're gonna keep rolling," and you guys say, "Hey, you shouldn't," but they just keep rolling, and you don't have levers? I mean, what is out there? Impeachment, further investigations. What can you do to?
I mean, you're going through the list. I know it's frustrating. I get it. I get that people are frustrated. I'm frustrated too, right? Yeah. But there's not a brilliant answer. What I've said. And I've been very outspoken about the problems with the Democratic Party. I've said Democrats need to be focused on doing two things right now. One, standing up to Trump however we can. And yes, we're filing lawsuits. We are speaking out. We are holding him accountable. I mean, I hope you saw my clip when I just happened to be on CNN when the Oval Office meeting with Zelensky was concluding. And I said exactly what I believe to be the truth, which is that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are cowards. That's how they behaved in front of Zelensky, who's a hero. They behave like cowards. So I'm not going to be afraid to call it like it is, tell the American people what's really going on here. But the other thing that Democrats need to be doing is looking ourselves in the mirror and fixing our party so that we can win again. Because we lost badly an election that should have been a cakewalk. We were running against a convicted felon. Okay, at the head of a party. This should have been a cakewalk, and yet we lost across the board. So Democrats also need to have the honesty, the integrity, the humility to say, hey, we've got to make some changes because we've lost touch, by definition, with the majority of Americans. And so that's why I've not been afraid to call out the Democratic Party and say we need to make some changes ourselves.
Can I ask you, Seth, you're a strategist, you're a political strategist, you've been a military strategist. Part of strategy is creating priorities. The Democrats don't seem to have a unified strategy, a unified leader, or priorities. In this moment, do you help them prioritize? For example, who is the Republican that can be moved? When you're talking to folks, a lot of folks who are listening are Republicans. Many of them are independents. The last time we knew, Joni Ernst was critical, and she crumbled. Now, in this moment with Hegseth, where would you recommend people focus their energy in trying to move Republicans that might be movable?
Well, I think you need to talk to Republicans who are in tough districts because they're the ones who have to listen to Democrats and Republicans. So not the deep red Republicans, but the ones in tough districts. And I think you should also appeal to Republicans who are veterans. And that's what I've been doing. I mean, I had an extensive conversation with this about this with a Republican who fits both of those descriptions, checks both of those boxes yesterday. I'm not going to use his name because I don't want to make this harder for him than it already is, but I'm trying to get him to come around and say, it's great what you're saying to me right now personally, but you need to say this out in public. Actually, I had that conversation with two Republicans yesterday, but one in particular who checks these two boxes that we just discussed. So find Republicans who have to listen to Democrats, find Republicans who must have some sense of duty and honor because they served in our military and understand what it means to keep our national security safe. But honestly, the other thing that Democrats do need to do, and I'm super focused on this as well, Paul, is start winning elections, right? So I have this organization called Serve America I started that was instrumental to taking back the House during Trump's first term. In fact, in 2018, when Democrats had to win back the House because Republicans, just like now, controlled everything in Washington, more than 50% of the seats that we flipped in the entire country were my Serve America veterans. And so we're trying to repeat that now for 2026. There's a lot of bad stuff that can happen between now and 2026. I get that. But we also can't keep our eye off the ball that we've got to win. That the number one way we can fix this is winning.
I appreciate it, but I think you're right. I mean, folks can't wait till 26 because who knows where we'll be by then, especially when these guys have got the nuke codes. And I appreciate the long view.
Well, you got to do both. You
Yeah,
gotta have
you've
the
got to
short
do both.
length,
Some
and
of
you gotta
your
have the long
candidates may be up against some of the independent Veterans of America candidates, and that will get interesting. But if they're not, I hope that you and other Democrats will support independents who can win. People like Dan Osborne, I think, have shown what's possible.
I did support Dan.
Right?
In fact, I supported him with Serve America. Dan Osborne was a Serve America candidate. He came close.
He did.
And
He really did.
you
And I
know,
think there's an insight. Let me ask you. I know you got to go in a couple minutes. I want to come back to something that doesn't get enough coverage, but we've been staying on. In the midst of all this, they are going to lay off 60,000 people at the Pentagon. That's roughly 20,000 veterans. Nationwide, every day, thousands of veterans are being laid off. If they stay on path to firing 1 million people, we're going to see 300,000 veterans fired, right? And you and many others have worked with us to improve veteran unemployment, to tackle this, to create off-ramps. For 2 decades, we've been working on this. And now we're going to blow a hole in it. President Trump has not offered an off-ramp for all these fired veterans. Elon Musk is not offering them jobs at Doge. For you in your district, when a veteran is fired who served their country, they're fired without cause, they're stuck in this purge of people across the nation, where do you send them? A lot of folks don't know where to go, and there's no landing point for them. For you as a veteran, where would you tell your fellow veterans who just got laid off to go for a job?
First of all, apply to my office. Second of all,
Better get a bigger office, man.
There are a lot of, I know, but there are a lot of great state and local, offices where you might be able to get jobs, and we're going to help you. The most important thing that veterans need to hear from this veteran serving in Congress, someone who, by the way, made a commitment to keep going to the VA, even as a member of Congress, so that I could get the same medical care as my fellow vets. We're going to help you. We're going to help you however we can. But let's also just, talk about the elephant in the room here, which is that the Trump administration hates veterans. That's not a strong statement. John Kelly, Marine General, former Trump Chief of Staff, has said, Trump said that they're losers and suckers. Losers for signing up, suckers for getting killed. We know that Elon Musk has no respect for veterans. He's slashing people at the VA. So veterans like me are going to wait in line. We're going to see veterans dying on waiting lists again, trying to get health care. Pete Hegseth obviously has no respect for veterans because he's unwilling to take basic accountability for his actions and lead by example. He doesn't have any respect for active duty troops. Tulsi Gabbard obviously has forgotten her fundamental values that she was supposed to learn in the National Guard as well. I mean, the reality is that this administration, for all their tough talk, does not respect veterans, and you can see it with their actions. Now, Democrats, by the way, have a huge opportunity here to show that we're going to stand up for veterans. And I'll be the first to say that there have been Democrats in the past who have not been great on veterans issues. But there are also a lot of great new Democratic leaders, like Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan, like Pat Ryan in New York that you mentioned. There are other veterans. Look at the lineup we've got in the House: Chrissy Houlihan, Mikey Sherrill. I mean, these are great veterans who are leaders, who are making a difference, and are going to show America that if you want to take care of vets, then you should vote Democrat.
So I'm going to push you on that and say, please get back to us, because I hope you guys can create a strategy, right? Like, this is a moment for a veteran corps, a place to go. We've had Wes Moore on this show. He's offering to hire them in Maryland. Tim Walz has done the same in Minneapolis. They are obviously extremely valuable, but they're also creating a backbone of what I think is going to be a really important opposition to Trump, not just veterans, but FBI agents, so many other folks that are patriotic, that put country over party. And the patriotic purge may become a really important focal point of this and lead element of this opposition. But they're going to look for voices beyond politics. Is there anybody that you can point to or that you're looking to? We haven't heard from President Obama much. I've talked about that. I've called for CQ Brown to speak out. Is there anybody that's not a Democrat or a Republican that we can look to in this moment that can maybe transcend this partisanship and get more of America behind them and go above politics and really create a counter narrative to unite people in a way forward? Is there anybody that you look to or you're waiting to hear from that we can look to?
Well, look, I think there are a lot of great Americans out there who believe exactly what you're saying. And by the way, country over party, that's a Serve America phrase from 2018. People before politics, Serve America phrase from 2018. So Serve America is my strategy. If you haven't heard about it, look us up on live, serveamericapac.com. Look at the leaders that we have gotten behind, people who do, in fact, put the country first, who are not partisan, who remember these basic values of what it means to serve your country, where it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican or where you come from, what your religious beliefs are. You're going to do the right thing for America. I remember when I first ran for Congress, Paul, I had thousands of conversations all over my district. I'd never run for anything in politics before, never been involved whatsoever in politics. Was recruited by a nonprofit trying to get veterans to run for office to change our politics. And the single most memorable conversation I had was with a Navy veteran of World War II. I met him at the Agawam Diner up in Rowley, Massachusetts, on the side of the road. And he said to me, Seth, if you win this race, promise me that you'll go to Washington as an American, not as a Democrat or as a Republican, but as an American. And that's exactly the kind of congressman that I try to be every day. Now, there is a reality in today's political world that the Trump administration and the Republicans who are blindly following them, they don't respect vets. They don't respect our Constitution. They are trampling our national security. That is a political reality. But I never forget my guiding light. My first principle is that I am an American. I'm proud to serve this country, as I was in the Marines. And as I've often said about being in Congress, it's the second best job that I've ever had.
I appreciate it. I remember that when we were first introduced over email by a mutual friend when I first heard you were running, and been rooting for you ever since. And I think a lot of folks are rooting for you. And they're also watching to see if you all can create a strategy and ways to actually slow this down, because it's so much bigger than party. If you and Pat ever decide to leave the Democratic Party, I think you will be welcomed with open arms by millions of independents around the country. I hope you'll come here first to share that. But in the meantime, baseball season starts tomorrow. I wish the Yankees lots of victories over your Red Sox. And more importantly, I wish you the best, and know that we're rooting for you and we need you and we're counting on you more than ever before. So thank you for your leadership and your service, and especially for your time right now. I know you got a lot flying at you. Thanks to you and your team and your family for all you're doing right now, Seth. We appreciate it.
Hey, Paul, thank you. Thanks for your long history of service to this country, both in and out of uniform. I'm sure as hell not rooting for the Yankees, but I am rooting for you.
All right. Thanks, my friend. Go get him. Semper Fi. Stay vigilant.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
My thanks again to Congressman Seth Moulton for joining us, especially given all he's going on. He literally came right out of a briefing and came to talk to us, and I hope he'll join us again. Now, even if you don't agree with his politics, you have to respect his service, and you have to respect that he's running in when others run out. There's an old saying in the Marine Corps, no better friend, no worse enemy. Hopefully he can be that for our democracy in the next couple of weeks, especially. But he's definitely a helper, a person who brings the kind of spirit that Mr. Rogers talked about, the folks who are running in and inspiring others when others are running out or cowering in fear. And this week, I want to highlight an all-time epic helper, the great George Foreman. As a man of my age, I feel like I've known George Foreman my entire life. And he died this week. And I will truly miss him. I think all of America will miss him. He was an American original, a two-time world champion, an Olympic champion, and a good-hearted person who helped others and set a positive example. Check out this clip.
I had 3 meals for the first time in my life. It took me about 2 months before I realized, hey, they're going to have breakfast every day. And it changed my whole life. I started reading books. I started doing assignments. Richard Kibble, I'll never forget Richard Kibble from Seattle, Washington. And he always had a book he'd read. Sort of a hippie fella.
I'll post this full conversation with the Kitchen Sisters linked in the show notes, and I encourage you to check it out and learn more about the amazing and extraordinary life of George Foreman, and teach your kids about it. We were on our way to the start of flag football this weekend, yes, We're doing spring flag football, but on the way in the car, the boys and Lauren and I listened to this conversation. And I think it teaches some important lessons and brings some valuable perspective about how lucky many of us are and how we can answer the call. So if you see a helper out there that inspires you, use the hashtag #LookForTheHelpers. Hit me up on all the social media. As a reminder, I am also now on Blue Sky, so as Independent Americans. You can find us there, and you can find us at independentamericans.us. You can get some swag for Mother's Day and Father's Day, which are actually coming up, or you can wear it to the baseball games that you're hopefully going to go to in the next couple of weeks. But go to independentamericans.us, and if you don't already, please follow us on YouTube. We've got a great YouTube channel with lots of clips, all the conversations, all the way back to episode number 1. And you can watch this conversation, including my intro and my outro, which are on video on YouTube. We've been working hard at it, and I hope you like it. And big shout out to our Patreon friends, the vigilant, the very vigilant, the most vigilant, who continue to power this work. If you like this episode, donate $1. Just give us $1 through our Patreon community, and you'll get behind the scenes access. You'll get shows with no commercials. You'll get a heads up when I'm doing media. So go to independentamericans.us or find us on Patreon and join now. I want to give a shout out to one of those folks, Greg Tuntunjian. Greg, I'm sorry if I'm fucking up your last name, but thank you to you. I see you posting all the time in our Patreon community. Thank you to you and all the others. Just want to read a note that Greg posted there. He said, "Thanks for the preview, Paul, and for that glimpse of Grand Central Station. I didn't know about Jackie Onassis' contribution to its survival. When I'm in New York City, there are several buildings I associate with vigilance, and that's one of them." Thanks, Greg. Yep, our Patreon community got a heads up on our guest, and I recorded it in front of Grand Central. I'll try to post from interesting places around New York or wherever I am for our Patreon members exclusively. But big shout out to you, Greg, and everyone else who helps keep this show going. You can give us feedback in all kinds of ways, and you can also call us. So dial the number 317-721-1718, 317-721-1718. I want to hear from you. Tell me what you like about the show. Tell me what you hate about the show. Tell me whatever's on your mind and what struck a chord with you, especially as we continue to plow through the March Madness. We've all got to share that hope and share that inspiration. Speaking of March Madness, thank you to all of you who joined our first ever Independent Americans March Madness bracket. My bracket got completely blown apart with that devastating loss by St. John's, but somehow I'm still in 3rd place. In number 1 place, Steven Schlachter. Number 2, Chris Rosenthal. Dave England's in 4. Eric Rifkin in 5. Jay LaMonica in 5. What's up, Jay? Jackie Foltz in 5. Sean Tuckey also in 5. Bunch of people tied at 5. Matthew White at 9. Art Davis, my buddy Art Davis at 10. And Jane Kelly at 11. Good luck to all of you, and condolences to all my fellow Johnny fans. So in closing, as we continue to navigate that March Madness, here are 2 quick Rieckhoff's recommendations. Number 1, check out March Madness. I'm going to keep saying it, but check out our March Madness pool where you can see the updates. I will continue to post updates, but March Madness and the women's tournament is my other recommendation. If you haven't seen the women's tournament, and Paige Beckers at UConn in particular, you are missing out. Don't just watch the men, watch the women. It is equally, if not more exciting. And recommendation number 2, thankfully, baseball starts today. All around America, it is a day of hope, a day where everyone believes there's a chance their team can win the World Series. There's few things more American than baseball, and few things more unifying. And at times like this, we especially need those touch points where we can come together as Americans in a shared experience. And there's few more fun and more pure than baseball. And they've sped up the game. So if you haven't watched or been to a game in a while, I highly recommend it. It's actually a better game than the game I grew up on. And a follow-up recommendation. If you haven't seen a local youth game in your area, go and support them as well. If you haven't seen kids play sports in a while and you need a boost, that might be your answer. Go to your local parks or field and cheer on those little guys and gals that are giving it their all and showing us all what grit and determination and hope are all about. Spring is a time of hope, and even in this dark time, we're going to try to keep bringing it, because the future is full of independence. Because independents are the future, and we are not alone in our independence. Americans are more divided than ever before, but we at Independent Americans and Righteous Media are fighting to change that. Adding light to contrast to heat, trying to create some unity and busting up the status quo of those 2 parties that continue to dominate with dysfunction. So if you're among those 50% or so folks in America that are independents, this is your show. If you're independent curious and you're a Democrat or a Republican, or if you're a young person that hasn't decided yet, especially, you are the hope for the future, and we hope we can feed that hope. Because just like those little leagues starting up all around the country, our independent movement is hope for the future. Country over party. people over politics, light over heat, busting up that status quo and creating new leaders and new hope for the future. And our movement is growing. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Representative Seth Moulton. If you did, please share it far and wide and invite everyone you know to declare their independence, not just from the two parties, but also from the corporate and partisan media. And stay vigilant, my friends, because vigilance is the price of freedom, and one that we've really got to pay right now. And hope is still out there. Hope is the oxygen of democracy, and it will help us all stay vigilant. And no, you're not alone in your vigilance. Just like being in the ballpark with all kinds of other Americans, we are all vigilant. You got to watch out for those fly balls and foul balls flying at your head. That's what living in America is like right now. But we're all in this together. And spring is finally here. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. Thank you for listening. Down with Hamas. Still, remember, there are hostages. Down with Putin. Never forget our friends that are still in the fight. Slava Ukraine. Stay vigilant, America. And play ball. Let's go, Yanks.
Powered by Righteous Media.